trauma on a person's jaw. Mr. Rivera?
No objection.
Mr. Akakū?
No objection.
All right, this question will be asked. Next question. Was there any evidence of a pig being present on both? Wait, let me see. Okay. Hold on a second. Okay, the question reads, was there any evidence of a pig being present on both jaws and bra? Mr. Rivera?
No objection.
Mr. Akakū?
Lack of foundation.
I'll sustain the objection, in part because of the way the question is worded. Next jury question form. One question, how many hours or days does it take for nail slippage to occur after death? Mr. Rivera?
No objection.
Mr. Akakū?
No objection.
All right. I think now we've got about 3 questions. This would be about the 4th on nail slippage, but I'll go ahead and allow the question, there being no objection. Next question. Next jury question form. First question. Were tests done to see if there were any evidence of struggle discovered under the fingernail? Mr. Rivera.
Your Honor, I think that calls for speculation on your part.
Mr. Akakū.
No objection.
I'll allow this question as a follow-up. If so, what was discovered? Was it tested? Conclusion. Mr. Rivera.
No, she has no idea.
Mr. Akakū.
Compound lack of foundation.
All right, sustained. And I believe the first question is going to be answered in the negative, but I may be wrong. Next question, can you tell from human flesh whether injury was done while the victim still alive or after death? Mr. Rivera?
No objection.
Mr. Akakū?
No objection.
All right, this question will be asked. Next jury question form. First question, do you have an estimate of how old the hemorrhaging or inflammation on the front of the jaw / teeth was? Mr. Rivera?
You know, did you use the word hemorrhaging? Did the court say hemorrhaging?
Yeah, that's what it looks to me that's what it says. Yeah, let me read it again. Do you have an estimate of how old the hemorrhaging or inflammation on the front of the jaw / teeth was?
No objection.
Mr. Akakū.
Assumes facts, not in evidence. Speculative.
All right, sustained. Next question. What is the whitish markings on the bra? Salt water, perspiration, mold, larvae, mildew. Mr. Rivera.
You know, that calls for speculation.
Mr. Akakū.
Yeah, lack of foundation.
All right, I'll sustain the objection. Next question. Given the environmental surroundings, how long would it take for mold / mildew larvae to start growing on the subject bra? Mr. Rivera.
No objection.
Mr. Akakū.
Lack of foundation.
All right, sustained. Next jury question form. First question. Anatomically, if the heel and elbow are hard bones, what is the hardness of the jawbone? Mr. Rivera.
No objection.
Mr. Akakū.
Assumes facts, not in evidence.
All right, I'll question. Next question, could a jawbone, let's strike that. Could the jawbone wounds have been caused by a mechanical wood chipper? Excuse me.
No objection.
Mr. Arpo?
It's speculative.
All right, I'll sustain the objection. Next question, could the palate bone have fragmented, okay, let me start that again. Could the palate bone have been fragmented by a mechanical wood chipper? Mr. Rivera?
No objection, because she is qualified to talk about the tools that would have caused certain injuries.
Mr. Arpo?
A lack of foundation in terms of what a wood chipper would do.
And Your Honor, with respect to the previous question, again, she can talk about certain tools or instruments causing, being a source of injury.
You know what, I'll go back to the last question and allow it as well as this question. All right, next jury question form. First question is crossed out. Next question, is a jawbone dense and difficult to scrape or scratch? Mr. Rivera?
No objection.
Mr. Arpo?
Lack of foundation.
I'll allow the question. Next question, was the jawbone evidence processed through any machinery during testing? Mr. Rivera?
No objection.
Mr. Arpo?
I guess vague as to who it's referring to relative to testing and therefore lack of foundation as well.
I'll allow the question. Next jury question form. First question crossed out. Next question. What is your opinion or educated guesstimation of the age of decomposition on the jawbone and tissue? Days, hours, weeks? Mr. Rivera?
No objection.
Mr. Arpo?
Lack of foundation.
Sustained. Next question. Does various environmental surroundings matter contribute to the decompositioning process? Mr. Rivera?
No objection.
Mr. Arpo?
No objection.
All right, sustain. Excuse me. This question will be given. Next question: Does various parts of the human body decompose at varying rates? Why? Mr. Rivera.
No objection.
Mr. Arpo?
No objection.
This question will be asked. All right. For the next question, there's a notation, exhibit number 234 and 235, and then it says, what is the black circular indented spot below the front teeth? Injury or normal? Mr. Rivera?
No objection.
Mr. Arpo?
No objection.
All right, this question will be asked. And the next question, if injury, what is your opinion on how it may have been caused? Mr. Rivera?
No objection.
Mr. Arpo?
Lack of foundation.
No, I'll allow the question. Next jury question form, one question, it reads, typically how long does the body need to decompose to experience skin slippage when, for example, fingernails come off the fingers? Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, that's slightly different, so I have no objection.
Mr. Arpo?
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Sure. Typically, how long does a body need to decompose to experience skin slippage when, for example, fingernail come off the fingers?
Defer to the court. I'll defer to the court.
Okay. I'll allow it, but I don't know if it's that much different from the others, but
That'll be the last question I will object to.
actually, and there's another question on this form. It reads, what additional factors in the environment could speed or slow the process of decomposition, causing, for example, skin slippage? Mr. Rivera. Mr. Rivera. Mr. Rivera.
I'll defer.
And I'm sorry, I missed the question, I'm sorry.
Okay, what additional factors in the environment could speed or slow the process of decomposition, causing, for example, skin slippage?
No objection.
All right, this question will be asked. And last question. Can decomposition, skin slippage, occur as early as 5 days? Mr. Rivera.
I have no objection.
All right, Mr. Elford.
I'll defer to the court.
All right, I'll allow the question. Yeah. All right, we'll have the witness and jury return to the courtroom. And do you have your next witness available?
Yes, Your Honor. He's outside.
Is that going back to?
Mr. Rose.
Okay, all right. You may be seated. The record will reflect the presence of the members of the jury and our witnesses returned to the courtroom. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. You may be seated. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had the witness outside of the courtroom while we've gone through your questions. And so we're going to be going to the jury questions now. And so do you understand that you're still under oath?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to read questions to you, and after I read a question, I would say that you can answer the question. You can then face the jurors and answer the question. After you're through answering the question, if you would look back to me as you're doing right now, I'll take that as a signal that you're finished answering the question, and then we'll go on to the next question. After the last question, I'll see if the attorneys have any follow-up questions for you. All right? If you would like me to read a question again, just let me know. I'll be happy to do that. Okay?
Okay.
All right. The first question reads, can soil and or other surrounding environment accelerate decomposition or flesh becoming separated from the nail? You may answer the question.
The short answer is yes, the environment will affect decomposition and that includes the flesh separating from the nail. This includes the air temperature, the amount of the amount of moisture, active rainfall or direct sunlight, and it also includes things like soil or anything that may be around the nail or around the body that may change the temperature or change the moisture content, will affect decomposition.
The next question reads, were informed or advised of any wildlife footprints, feces, or other evidence of wildlife presence where evidence was discovered? You may answer the question.
No, I was not.
Okay, the next question reads, would it be true that injuries from boar teeth or tusk would be closer to a tear-like fashion versus a clean cut from a sharp object? You may answer the question.
So in terms of the, in general, a tear, if we're talking about skin, say, so a tear, the medical term we use is laceration, and that's where the skin is torn due to a blunt traumatic injury that causes the skin to tear, as opposed to a incised wound or a stab wound that we already talked about that is due to a sharp object. Now there's a type of injury that is a combination of the two, which we term a chop type injury, and that is the type of injury that I would most expect from a boar tusk. A chop injury has aspects of both a sharp wound and a blunt wound because it's a relatively sharp object, so the tusk with a lot of force behind it in terms of the animal's jaw. So a chop type of injury tends to have a lot of crushing from the jaw, and that's kind of blunt injury, and some tears and incised type wounds of the skin from the sharp edge of the tusk. So if we had skin or soft tissue, that's the type of injury that I would expect to see. In a bone, a chop type injury would be a combination of some sharp marks on the bone with fractures from the force of the jaw, or from the blunt trauma of the jaw. So that's the type of injury that I would expect from a boar jaw and tusk.
The next question reads, is your profession, job responsibility, and tasks are of an examiner versus an investigator, yes or no?
So my job responsibilities here, and so in Maui County, the coroner, who is the person in charge of the death investigation as a whole, and by law the coroner is the chief of police. So that is why in Maui County the police are in charge of death investigations. So their role here is the investigator, and my role here is the forensic pathologist. By law, my title is actually the coroner's physician. So I am the physician that assists the coroner by doing autopsies. Now that's my legal definition of our roles. Because my training also includes more than just the autopsy. It includes participating in scene investigations and death investigations. I do provide that service on an as-needed basis when they have questions for me regarding the actual investigation. But as far as who's in charge of the investigation, that is the police.
The next question reads, in your opinion, were injuries, damage to evidence, more consistent to a sharp object inflicted versus bruising or tear-type injuries which would be caused by wildlife pulling, tugging, and or chewing on evidence? You may answer the question.
I'm sorry, can you reread that?
Sure. In your opinion, were injuries, damage to evidence, more consistent to a sharp object inflicted versus bruising or tear-type injuries which would be caused by wildlife pulling, tugging, and or chewing on evidence? You may answer the question.
Okay, so I think what's being asked is, are the injuries more consistent with a sharp injury like a blade versus a animal activity, which tends to be more dull? Even though animals do have sharp teeth, they're not as sharp as a knife. And you use the term evidence, so I don't know if you're referring to the jaw or the bra, but in both cases I favor the defects in the bra and the injuries to the jaw were most likely caused by a sharp object rather than animal activity.
The next question reads, how many days would you think it would take for human nails to start coming off? You may answer the question.
I have seen it happen in as short as 3 to 4 days, and I've also seen, and it depends again on the humidity, the level of moisture, the temperature, the body habitus, or the size of the decedent. So I've seen it happen as quickly as within 3 days, and I've seen cases where it took much longer to develop.
All right, the next question reads, how quickly can skin slippage occur? You may answer the question.
This is a similar question, and skin slippage starts in a more mild form than that associated with the nails falling off. So before a body gets to the point where the nails are falling off, you'll see skin slippage elsewhere that is thinner and develops earlier. So that type of skin slippage can start to develop if you're in a really warm environment, which some people are in Hawaii because a lot of people don't have air conditioning. So in a warm environment, you can start developing skin slippage as early as 36 to 48 hours.
The next question reads, how long after death would it take for skin slippage to detach fingernails from the fingertips? You may answer the question.
Okay, so again, it would take a minimum of about 3 days.
The next question reads, would the cut marks on the right lower jaw be consistent with a pig's tusk? You may answer the question.
In my opinion, the cut marks on the right jaw are not consistent with a pig's tusk. And the reason for this is that a pig's tusk is, while it is sharp, it is not as sharp as the marks that were on the jaw. The marks on the jaw were less than were about a millimeter in width. And the photos that I've seen of injuries created by a tusk are significantly wider.
The next question reads, do you know if a pig could create a blunt force trauma on a person's jaw? You may answer the question.
Yes, a pig could create that because a pig has a very strong jaw. So if a pig bit a human jaw or bit any human bone, they could cause a fracture, which is the type of blunt injury you see in a bone. So the answer is yes.
All right, the next question reads, how many hours or days does it take for nail slippage to occur after death?
Okay. Again, it takes at least about 3 days for that to start to develop.
All right, the next question reads, were tests done to see if there were any evidence of struggle discovered under the fingernail? You may answer the question.
So what I would think you're asking is, were DNA tests done or tests for foreign material under the nail? Was testing of that sort done? And I did not participate in any testing done on the nails in that fashion, but that is a question to ask Tony Earls and the MPD detective if they pursued that route.
The next question reads, can you tell from human flesh whether injury was done while the victim still alive or after death? You may answer the question.
In most cases, yes, and it depends on the injury. If the body's still intact and there's skin and muscle present, you can tell, number one, if there's bleeding. If there's no bleeding, then it may have occurred after death. But if there's bleeding around the wound in the tissue, that's a sign that the heart was still beating when the injury happened. If someone survived for several hours or days after the injury, you start to get inflammation, so you can actually look at it under the microscope and see that. So when you have soft tissue like muscle or skin present, I can use those factors to determine if an injury occurred before death. But in the case of bone, there's the soft tissue is not there for me to look for hemorrhage and to look for the inflammation.
The next question reads, anatomically, if the heel and elbow are hard bones, what is the hardness of the jaw bone? You may answer the question.
So I think the question is, how hard is the jaw relative to the elbow and the heel? And the jaw is a little thinner than both the large bone of the elbow and the large bone in the heel. So the jaw would be a little bit easier to fracture than those two bones.
All right, the next question reads, could the jawbone wounds have been caused by a mechanical wood chipper? You may answer the question.
I do not think they would have been caused by a wood chipper. To answer that definitively, I would need to look at a wood chipper in detail, which I haven't done, to look at the type of blades they have and to compare that. But
So I'm going to object to the lack of foundation with the strike.
I think the answer is, at this point, no, so I don't think that's improper, or that she can't tell. Unless I not know that
I
she
think
can't
it was leaning in the affirmative in the beginning.
The answer was I do not think that
Well,
the wound could have been caused, but then it goes on to say, would need to look you need to look at the wood chipper.
yeah, so
So,
even that beginning part is to the extent it's premised on the latter part, the answer indicates lack of foundation, I would object lack of foundation.
all right, I'll sustain the objection, and are you moving to strike?
I am.
All right, I'll grab the motion. All right, the next question reads, could the palate bone have been fragmented by a mechanical wood chipper?
So yeah, same objection.
Well, let me, respectfully, it would seem that this particular bone fragment and that circumstance is different from the last question relating to the jawbone. So if you feel you can answer that question,
okay. Can you repeat the question just to make sure I heard it correctly?
Sure, yeah, and could the palate bone have been fragmented by a mechanical wood chipper?
So the palate bone did not show any specific injuries on the bone itself. It showed the fractures on all of its edges where it had been broken from the rest of the skull. But they were non-specific fractures. So these are fractures caused by blunt trauma, which could have been caused by any number of things, which does include a wood chipper. So I would say yes, the palate could have been fractured by a wood chipper because the injuries on it were so non-specific.
All right, the next question reads, is the jawbone dense and difficult to scrape or scratch? You may answer the question.
All bones are relatively dense, so I would answer that all bones are somewhat difficult to scrape or to scratch.
All right, the next question reads, was the jawbone evidence processed through any machinery during testing? You may answer the question.
It was not during my examination of it, and not to my knowledge afterwards. The only processing of it when it was when I was examining it was light washing with running water from a faucet and a toothbrush to clean it off.
The next question reads, does various environmental surroundings contribute to the decompositioning process? You may answer the question.
Okay, so the answer is yes. The temperature, the amount of moisture, the amount of sunlight, and even the body itself, how much body fat the person has, if they had a fever at the time they died. All of these things that affect temperature and moisture can affect the rate of decomposition.
All right, and the next question reads, does various body parts of the human body decompose at varying rates? Why? You may answer the question.
Yes, they can. And this is, so for instance, in your abdomen, in your colon, we have healthy bacteria that live there when we're alive. And when you die, that bacteria is still there and they start to flourish and to overgrow. So the abdomen will actually start to discolor and decompose a little bit faster than other parts of the body. The fingertips and the toes, the nose and the ears, because they're thin, they'll start to dry out faster than the rest of the body. So initially the body will decompose at different rates in different areas.
Right, the next question, for the next question we need exhibits 234 and 235. Why don't we bring up 234? And also be ready to publish 235, please.
You're showing exhibit 234 right
All right, thank you. The next question is prefaced by these two exhibit numbers, Dr. Harrell. So, number 234 and 235. What is the black circular spot below the front teeth? Injury or normal?
Can I go down?
Yes, you may.
first?
Yeah, absolutely. You may use the pointer as well.
You said
And you know what? Maybe we should also show State's exhibit
now. We can do
235.
side by side, Your Honor.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
While he's doing that, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Okay. It goes exhibit number 234 and 235. What is the black circular spot below the front teeth? Injury or normal? You may answer the question.
So I think you're referring to the black dot here in 234 near the anterior portion of the jaw, and here in 235 also near the anterior portion of the jaw. And these are not injuries. These are areas where there is some still attached decaying soft tissue. So the same soft tissue that you see on the end of the bone and on the bottom of the bone, there is still a little bit attached, and it just happens to be in this somewhat circular formation. So this is not an injury.
All right, there's a follow-up, and you may, at any rate, I'll just read it,
Okay.
and perhaps you've answered it. If injury, what is your opinion on how it may have been caused? And
Okay, so it's not an injury. So.
all right, thank you. All right. The next question reads, typically, how long does a body need to decompose to experience skin slippage when, for example, fingernails come off the fingers? You may answer the
Okay,
question.
so again, the skin will start to slip within as little as 36 hours, but for it to slip significantly enough for the entire nail to start slipping off takes at least 3 to 4 days.
All right, and the next question reads, what additional factors in the environment could speed up, excuse me, let me start that again. What additional factors in the environment could speed or slow the process of decomposition, causing, for example, skin slippage? You may answer the question.
So probably there's many factors, as I've already said. Probably the most important one is temperature. So in cold temperatures and very cold temperatures, bodies will not decompose for sometimes months. In warm temperatures, and by warm I mean what we have here in Hawaii, 80-degree days, 90-degree days, bodies will start to decompose very rapidly. And as I said before, moisture also plays a role. Bodies in a damp environment will decompose a little more quickly than those in a dry environment.
And the last question reads, can decomposition, skin slippage, occur as early as 5 days? You may answer the question.
So the answer is yes. It can. Skin slippage starts to occur at 36 hours. The nails can slip off as quickly as 3 days in a warm, humid environment.
All right, Mr. Rivera, any follow-up?
Briefly, Your Honor, thank you. So, Dr. Harrell, I'm just getting to the, I know you've been asked a lot of questions regarding skin slippage, so I'm not going to ask you another one of those. But with respect to decomposition, you said the temperature has a lot to do with, I guess, how quickly a body can decompose.
Yes.
And in Hawaii, not only do we have the warm temperatures, but we have high humidity, is that correct?
Correct.
So how does humidity play a role in this?
So humidity, in a more humid environment, a body will decompose more quickly, and they will even decompose somewhat differently. In a very, very dry environment like a desert, you don't get any of the type of decomposition we get in here in Hawaii, where you get skin slippage and bloating and the body turning greenish brown, which are all things that we see with every body here in Hawaii. But in a place like Arizona in the desert, the bodies almost become mummified because of the near complete lack of humidity.
And have you been out to ever been out to the K9 Hana area while you were working here in Maui?
Yes, I have.
And how would you describe the temperature as far as weather conditions with respect to what you just testified to right now?
So,
I'm going to object this to relevance. unless we're talking about a specific time period, the year perhaps.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think if you I'm going to sustain the objection, but if you rephrase the question, that would be fine.
Now, you testified earlier that you did, I guess, observe and examine the jawbone that you had identified as belonging to Charlie Scott in February of 2014, correct?
Yes.
So during that time period, I guess for Hawaii it would be the winter months, specifically out towards the geographical area by K9, towards Hana, that area. Are you familiar with the temperature and the humidity in that area?
Yes.
And how would that play a factor, if at all, with respect to the decomposition of the human body?
So just to make sure we're all on the same page, I kind of lump the east side of the islands near sea level, lump them all sort of close together in terms of climate. So in terms of amount of rainfall and temperature, east side of the islands near sea level is kind of what we're talking about here. So even in the winter, the temperatures are still sometimes up into the 80s, rarely below the 60s. When I talk about temperatures being high or low in terms of decomposition, a low temperature is something air conditioning or below, so something 70 degrees or less. So the temperature, even in the winter months at sea level in Hawaii on the windward side, will still get up near 80, and will be in the 70s throughout large periods of the day. So that's still warm as far as decomposition is concerned, and that is a relatively wet time of year, and that's a relatively wet side of the islands throughout the year. So there's a lot of humidity and a lot of rainfall, and a relatively warm temperature in terms of decomposition.
And then, and you just mentioned rainfall. Does that play a factor into the decomposition process as well?
It does, number one, in terms of raising the humidity. Number two, in terms of water falling on the body will make it decompose more quickly.
Yeah. And I just have a couple more questions. You're asked by one of the juror questions about the black circular spot, and you testify that that is not an injury. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you said it's still, or in your opinion, it was attached decaying tissue.
Correct.
And when you use the word decaying tissue, are you referring to human flesh?
Yes, decomposing human flesh that's attached to the bone.
Then another question that was asked of you, with respect to the jawbone, whether or not bones are somewhat difficult to scratch. You remember you asked that question? And then you testified that yes, it is fairly difficult to scratch. Is that the response?
Yes, I think the question was specifically about the jaw, and my response was that bones in general are difficult to scratch in comparison to other tissues like the skin or internal organs. Bones are relatively difficult to create an injury in.
And with respect to make contact, if a tool were to make contact with the bone itself, tool on bone, specifically in this instance, the jawbone on the right area that you had described earlier, what type of tissue or levels of tissue, if any, would a tool have to, I guess, pass through in order to reach the bone itself?
So in an intact body, the tissue, the tool, or whatever was going to injure the bone would have to go through the skin, and it would have to go through the subcutaneous tissue, which is a thin layer of fat under the skin. I would then have to go through muscle and the fascia, which is a very thin fibrous layer that surrounds the muscle, and then it would come up to the jaw at that point.
And another question that was asked of you, whether or not it was your opinion if the cut marks that you observed on the right portion of the jawbone, was that consistent with a pig's tusk? And you answered that the linear incisions that you saw, or the cut marks you saw, was about 1 millimeter in width, is that correct?
That's correct.
And can you show us what is a millimeter?
A millimeter, okay, so this is my best attempt to show. I mean, a millimeter is very small. If you're more familiar with inches, it's less than a 1/16 of an inch. So it's a very small, narrow wound.
And then you mentioned from the photograph that you saw after, I guess, researching an article, injury from a tusk on the bone that you had observed was much wider. Is that correct?
Yes, they were the photos I saw. They were wider. They were closer to the width of the tusk itself. So in the photo, they were approximately a 1/2 inch or more in width.
I'm almost done there. You testified also pursuant to one of the jurors' questions that yes, a bore can cause a blunt force trauma, for example, to the jawbone area. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that, however, you wouldn't just see the blunt force trauma to the injury. There would be also there'd be an aspect of a sharp wound.
Succeeding.
Let me have a question.
Did you mention that in addition to the blunt force?
Please, okay, you know what, you better start this question again, I'm sorry,
I will,
I need to hear the whole question.
I'll withdraw that.
All right,
You mentioned, upon answering one of the jurors' questions regarding whether or not a bore could cause the blunt force trauma to the jawbone that you described earlier and referring to the right side of the jawbone, you mentioned that the type of injury you would see in addition to the blunt force trauma would include an aspect of a sharp wound. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I described the type of injury that I would expect a boar to create with their jaw and their tusk as a chop wound, which has combined features of some sharp elements, some elements of sharp force injury and some elements of blunt force injury. And this is because the tooth is sharp and it's being propelled by the strong, blunt jaw. So there's the blunt crushing from the power of the jaw, and then there are some sharp. The tusk is relatively sharp, and again, as I've said before, it is in the photos I've seen of pig tusks, they're sharp, but they're not as sharp as a knife. So the type of a crush injury, if it was an intact body, what you would get is a perforation of the skin, because the tusk is sharp enough to perforate the skin, and then crushing of the underlying tissue and bone due to the power of the jaw. So you might get, and these crush type of injuries are very heterogeneous because it depends on how sharp the tusk is, how powerful the jaw is. So there's a lot of different factors going on, and they would be different even between, possibly between different boars. So crush injuries are very heterogeneous, and they can have varying elements of blunt force trauma and some sharp elements as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, my last line of questions to you with respect to the juror questions. You testified earlier that as a forensic pathologist, in addition to the physical evidence that you observed, you mentioned you also rely on information provided by, I guess, witnesses and police. Is that correct?
Right. As part of the death investigation, I take into account the totality of the investigation, which includes in Maui the investigation run by the police, which may include witness statements, medical history, evidence from the scene.
And at that time when you were reviewing the physical evidence, had you been provided with any evidence that indicated the presence of any wild animals at the scene where these animals were recovered from?
No, I had not been shown any evidence or told that there was evidence of wild animals being at the scene.
Thank you. I have no further questions here.
Mr. Upwell.
Yes, just briefly. If I could just clarify what, I can't quite catch the word that you're using to describe or call the, is it the hybrid?
The chop wound.
Is it like
So-
chopping food?
Yeah, so the term that, this is not a term I invented, this is the term that is used in forensic pathology, is a chop type wound. And it's because, the classic example is an axe, because an axe has a sharp end but has a lot of weight behind it. So the analogy, and I think where the term chop came from, is because they're thinking about chopping wood with an axe, so that's where that term comes from.
Now, would it be accurate to say that in terms of your testimony regarding this chop, for example, that you're talking in the context of attacks by wild boar, right? As distinguishable from wild boar eating, for example.
Yes, I'm not an expert in wild boar eating behavior, but I would imagine that they wouldn't necessarily use the full force of their jaw when they're trying to pull flesh off a dead animal. So,
Well, in terms of going into it, right? But in terms of pulling things, you don't know how they, for example, tear apart the body to eat it.
right, and in that if they're feeding on a dead animal or a dead body, it wouldn't necessarily be a chop type of wound.
Well, you don't necessarily know that because, for example, if they were to be chewing on the jaw, it would crush the jaw, right?
That's true. Yes.
And if they were, for example, chewing on the jaw with their teeth, it could leave scrape marks on the jaw, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And on that note, when you testify that the injury to the lower right jawbone is not consistent with animal activity, well, let me start with that. Is that your testimony?
Yes, that is my testimony.
Now, would you agree with me that one of the biggest... would you agree with me that one of the biggest premises that you're working off of relative to the injury or the defects on the lower right jawbone is that based on your observations and examination, the spacing between the marks are not uniform and consistent?
I wouldn't say that that's a primary factor in my analysis of it. I would, if they were uniformly spaced out, that might make me think that there might be some sort of some sort of tool that's evenly spaced that created, and I use the term tool loosely, that created those injuries. But the spacing between them is not a major factor in my description.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, that it was your testimony that the uneven spacing of those marks was part of the reasons why you believe it is not animal, for example, canine bites, right?
I do object.
No.
I don't think that was a testimony. It had to do with the instrument and not the animal.
I'll sustain the objection. I don't have a problem with you examining with respect to this area, but I do think you need to rephrase the question.
Well,
Thank you.
if I'm not mistaken, in the beginning of your testimony, you noted the 4 marks on the lower jawbone, right?
Correct.
And you specifically testified that they were spaced unevenly on the jaw, right?
Correct.
And would you agree with me that that is one of the premises or one of the factual premises that makes you believe that this is not consistent with any kind of teeth marks, for example?
No, that is not one of the features that makes me think this is not a tooth mark, because if an animal bit twice, they could be unevenly spaced from multiple bites. So that's actually not one of the features that I'm primarily relying on to say that this is not caused by an animal. The features that make me, that help me form my opinion that these injuries are not due to an animal has more to do with how narrow and sharp they are and how uniform they are in their width one to the other. So the spaces between them is not a major factor.
But relative to that, that's your analysis relative to tusk marks, right? Not teeth marks.
I object because he's mixing testimony, mixing testimony, and that's not what she said.
I believe the witness can answer the question. I'll overrule the objection. You may answer the question.
Okay, that is my analysis in relation to this being a human-inflicted injury versus an animal-inflicted injury. So it's not specific to tusks. These wounds are very sharp, they're very narrow, and they are most consistent with a sharp weapon such as a knife rather than a tooth. While animals' teeth can be sharp, in my opinion, they are not generally as sharp as the injuries seen on the jawbone.
But when you're talking about sharp, you're talking as if we're talking about the sharpness of a tooth being like this, right?
Yes.
You're not taking into consideration, for example, the edges of a tooth, right?
Well, I'm taking
which itself would be sharp at its edges, right?
I'm taking into consideration any biting surface of the tooth.
Okay, but you'd agree with me that for every flat surface of a tooth, there would be 4 corners capable of making scratches, right?
Yes, the corners of teeth are relatively sharper than the flat edges. Yes.
Now, I want to ask you about your testimony regarding the uneven spacing of those marks. If I may approach the witness, Your Honor, with what I have identified as Defense Exhibit G.
Yes, you may.
Counsel has a copy. Could you take... I think we're prepared to do it. If you could take a look at that and so if you could recognize that.
Yes, this appears to be a blown up or a zoomed in photo of the sharp force injuries, the incised wounds on the jaw.
Okay, does that look like an accurate, I guess, copy of the photograph of that lower right jaw with the exception of it being blown up?
Yes, it looks accurate.
Does it look to be tampered in any way other than putting a graph on it?
Not to my and not in my opinion, no.
Does it seem to be inaccurately distorted in any way?
No, it does not.
Your Honor, may I offer that into evidence?
Mr. Rivera.
Your Honor, there's no objection.
And that's defendant's G.
It would be marked as G.
Oh, what?
G, yes, stage G. Or me on H? I'm sorry, that's, I guess I stand corrected, it would be defense H.
All right. Let's just make sure that, because the question is related to G as opposed to H, Mr. Rivera, we're now talking about defendant's exhibit H.
I just want to make clear, is this the same one that the state
I
has?
think you should look at the exhibit and make sure that you're all on the same page.
That's fine.
May I approach?
Yes. So your questions that refer to defendant's exhibit G actually refer to defendant's exhibit H. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. We'll note that for the record.
Like that. And this one's zoomed in more.
This more larger. Your Honor, the state has a different photograph, but also it's an even larger.
So, my apologies. Let me give you all that I have and we'll get the right one. Your Honor, may I approach the witness to get that back?
You may.
So this is yeah, that's what you
correct something here. Your Honor, if I may approach the witness, and if the court, with the court's permission, if I have her authenticate this or lay the foundation for this, I would actually like this to be G.
G or H?
I'm sorry, H.
Yeah, the only issue the state has with that is the coloring is different. I'm not sure if it's because of the copy but it's not the same coloring as the actual photographs provided.
This is how it comes up when it's blown up, but if I lay the foundation with the witness. Oh yeah, we're not going to talk about coloring at all, sorry.
I'm sorry?
We're not going to talk about coloring at all.
Well, Mr. Rivera.
I'm just, the state is just concerned of where we're going to go with this at this point, because it is, the appearance itself, because of the change of coloring. Then, if the demonstration is only with respect to spacing, I have no objection.
All right. For that limited purpose, then why don't you approach the witness?
So I'm substituting what I'm identifying now for the record as Defense Exhibit G.
No, H.
I'm sorry, H. If you could take a look at that, if I could ask you some questions briefly.
Okay.
Does that look like a fair and accurate copy of a picture of the lower right jawbone?
Yes, it is a blown up portion of the lower right jaw.
Again, with the exception of the lines that are grafted on that, does the blown up picture appear to be altered in any way?
No.
Is that true compared to the original as well?
Yes.
Does it appear to be a distortion of either the original or a copy?
No, it's not.
Okay, with that, Your Honor, may I move the new Defense Exhibit H into evidence?
Okay.
This one.
All right. In the court at this time, well, let's get the exhibit and the exhibit tag just so we can staple those together so we
This
know.
is the wrong tag.
Okay.
It's G. Sorry.
Okay, and if
Did I say G?
Yeah, that's just G.
Because it has to be changed to H.
Hmm?
That text is G, so it has to be changed to
Okay,
H.
correct. That's the
if I may approach.
sheet, the fly sheet for G.
If I may approach. Oh, I don't.
Oh, I see yours. Yeah, okay. Why'd you do that? All right, at this time, the court will receive in evidence defendant's exhibit H, so marked for identification purposes.
Okay, I guess relative to the issue and your testimony of whether those marks were evenly spaced out or not, did you at any time during your examination conduct any tests to see whether they were evenly spaced? For example, measurements or transposing the image?
When I was visually examining the jawbone, I visually examined it, and I could see without even needing to measure that they were unevenly spaced.
Okay, so permission to publish H, Your Honor?
Permission granted.
Can you turn this on? And your testimony would be that there were 4 such marks on that lower right jawbone. Is that accurate?
Right.
Okay. So for
Just to clarify, there were 4 that were more anterior, and then there were 2 on the posterior portion. So there's 4 that are clustered together that are in this photo.
okay, and would that be the 4 that we're looking at in the published Defense Exhibit H?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's go ahead and from left to right. If we're looking at the image, can we label each one of those a number? And that would be 1, 2, 3, and 4 going from left to right as you look at the screen?
Okay.
Okay. Now, at any point during your examination, did you ever try to transpose things to mark it? Or to try to see if they were in fact evenly spaced or unevenly spaced?
No, I could just visually look at these 4, and among these 4, the spaces between them are uneven.
Well, you'd agree with me that that is the flat surface of the jaw, right?
Yes,
And at some part of the jaw is not as flat, right?
correct.
Okay. Now, if we were to transpose one, well, so is it your testimony then that the spacing between 1 and 2 is not the same as the spacing between 3 and 4?
No, it's my testimony that the spacing between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 are uneven, so they are not equal.
Okay, so that's obvious because of the 2 middle ones, right?
Right, because there's obviously less space between 2 and 3 than there are between 1 and 2 or 3 and 4.
Okay, but you'd agree with me that the spacing between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 are completely consistent with each other.
They, looking at this photo, they do appear very close to each other, yes.
Okay, let's try to transpose them to the right and see if you maintain that opinion. Can we agree that that's evenly spaced?
Yes, I would agree.
If we were to take it to the left, can we agree that that would be evenly spaced?
Yes, I would agree.
No further questions.
Mr. Rivera.
Okay, so you're showing these marks. Does this at all change your opinion that these marks are consistent with a sharp object as opposed to an animal?
No, it does not.
And the marks that we saw, are those the 1 millimeter of width marks that you testified to earlier?
Yes.
In fact, what we just saw, be transposing from one set of linear incisions or cut marks in the teeth. Does that mean anything to you at all?
Well, it is a very good observation, and it does mean that it's possible that whatever tool, and again I'm using the term tool incredibly loosely here, created these wounds. It could have been, a two-pronged, it could have possibly been something that was two-pronged, or with 2 blades, or with 2 sharp surfaces that hit the jaw twice. But
at any point does this? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. I think I was done answering.
And at any time, is your opinion changed other than being a tool or a sharp instrument that's anything other than that?
No, because my opinion is based not on the spacing between them, but on the incised wounds themselves, on their degree of sharpness and how narrow and sharp the bone edges are, that they were created by a sharp object such as a knife. So that is, my opinion is based on the incised wounds themselves, not the spaces between them.
Okay, thank you. I don't have a question.
Mr. Uncle.
Do you have any idea how many teeth a pig has?
I don't know.
Are you aware of the fact that baby boar teeth are called needle teeth?
Objection. He's testifying, Your Honor. There's no. At this point, it's all speculation.
It's a simple answer. A simple question.
Just a second, please. I'll overrule the objection. You may answer the question.
No, I was not aware of that.
I moved to strike because that's the statement for counsel. There's no testimony.
His question is not evidence.
Thank you.
I've read that to the jury during this trial more than once.
No further questions.
All right. Because I've read a number of questions to you, and there have been follow-up questions on those questions. I guess because I was the one that read them, I should ask you if the opinions you've expressed in response to those questions and follow-up questions are provided to a reasonable degree of medical certainty within the field of forensic pathology.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Your excuse. Okay, we'll take a recess at this time.
Is in recess.